Good evening, I'm Madison Carter. I'm the lead reporter for the team of journalists who brought you A Different Cry, and this was a team. This is a series that explores the rising suicide rates among Black children under 13, but it's about so much more than that. This is a story about racism. It's a story about a lack of resources, but really in the end, this is a story about a system that's not equipped to serve our children. This is A Different Cry.
I was often told that I couldn't have children. So knowing that he came, he's just my miracle child, truly. And I treated him like he was a miracle and that he was loved every single day. The only thing that he ever said he wanted to be since he was a small child, a superhero. That's it. I knew that he was a gift. And that is why he was so exposed to so many things, because I have seen the world. I just took my time to see it again through his eyes. Yeah, that's my dude.
Shout out to my family. I love you, Mama. I love you, Daddy. Mwah.
It really is speaking to the love of my husband and I. I saw him on one day. 7 days later, I saw him again. 7 being the number of completion, 7 being God's perfect number. But more than anything that I raised him on was, how many times do you forgive your enemy? It's 7 times 70.
Tammy Charles and her son 7 are where we're starting this story. What we originally thought was an isolated incident in a suburban Louisville school district ended up being about so much more. According to the Department of Education, 37% of Black kids say that they've been bullied over race, the way they talk, or even a disability. And 7 is one of those kids. We backed up his entire story through videos, school records, and police reports. This is what happened to 7.
The very first thing, a little girl called him a nigger on the bus. And then, fast forward the next week, he's on the bus and the little girl says, well, you know that nigger can't fight. He gets off the bus, runs to his dad and says, Daddy, I got choked on the bus, but don't be mad because I think he has a mental problem.
This kid put him in a headlock to the point where students on the bus were screaming for the bus driver to stop. The bus had to be pulled over. What is the district policy involving physical contact?
We individualize cases. We have the people in place with our bullying prevention team that can review complaints or concerns from families, and they work with our schools to resolve those matters. Children are safe in Jefferson County Public Schools. There have been reviews in the past for how investigations were looked at, and we have done different things to address that and make sure that everything is looked at through a very thorough lens.
I tell parents all the time, don't put your child in that position. So if they're complaining about it, go up to that school and demand that that school do something.
What happened to the meetings you're supposed to do today? You know you can't. I looked to the principal kind of like an overhead, like, did you get my message? And she just gave me this, it's been taken care of. I was at his school average twice a week for lunch. I volunteered for everything. It broke down the false security that I had, that I am this involved. They see me this much. And for that, maybe my kid would have some sort of exception.
I know that I can get it out of my mind, and tomorrow's like a better day, so I can still make friends with him.
77 days of the first time my son was bullied to the day he died. 77 days in between there. And this is why my son is dead. I said, well, what did the teacher say? And he said, Well, I want you to tell her to stop. And she said, well, how can I help her if your mom has called the principal and the principal's talked to her mom, and if your mom can't do it and the principal can't do it, what makes you think that I can stop her? And besides, Seven, nobody likes a tattletale. He died of being bullied to death. Wow, my kid.
There's this idea when you're young, developmentally, you may not understand the permanency of suicide. I don't think sometimes that kids understand there's no coming back from that. This is much younger children.
People always say black people don't do that. Yes, here's a picture.
I do think black parents in particular, we try to educate our kids about what it means to be black and how people are going to engage you in the world. I don't know that we're able to give them the full extent and teach them to the full degree of what those struggles are going to be like. What parent expects to have a race conversation with a child and the child is 5, 6 years old?
I never took the time to teach my son about racial differences, racial inequalities. I never did that because he was 10. I want this little boy to be a little boy. Come on, Seven. I went downstairs because he was so funny. He was such a jokester. And then, because at this point I'm mad, like, boy, where you hiding that, you know? So something said, look over my shoulder in his room. And there my baby was. But his back to me. I grab him around his waist and I say, boy, why would you do this? And I remember saying out loud, God, why my son? Why my son? And I heard, just as clear as I'm talking to you, a very nonchalantly put, I gave my son. I promise you, the words that I heard.
He was my special child.
Everybody's a woulda, coulda, shoulda until it happens to you. Woulda, shoulda, coulda. Wish I woulda, shoulda, coulda had my son.
Young male child measuring approximately 46 inches tall and appearing the stated age of 7 years.
When we say suicide doesn't discriminate, we mean that no one is immune from suicidal ideation, attempts, or even death.
I would do anything to have my son back, but Lord knows it's not gonna happen. He was my special child. When I was told I couldn't have no more kids, I had him. So that's why I call him my special baby.
He was so full of energy and he loved dressing in costumes. He'll come out wearing a Batman, mask and Superman cape.
The deceased is dressed in a one-piece Batman pajama suit and a pair of black underpants.
I feel like my baby just was pushing everything in that little brain of his, a 7-year-old, dealing with calling a nigger, snaggletooth. You're ugly, you dress funny. He did not want us to go up there and embarrass him because he didn't want to get nobody in trouble. So he didn't say nothing. He was just dealing with it and praying for them.
Young male child measuring approximately 46 inches tall and appearing the stated age of 7 years.
Everybody's a woulda, coulda, shoulda until it happens to you. Woulda, shoulda, coulda. Wish I woulda, shoulda, coulda had my son.
I would do anything to have my son back, but Lord knows it's not gonna happen.
Black kids are dying by suicide at rates 2 times higher than their white peers. And as we started digging into the numbers, we found research and experts were backing up the facts that the numbers that are actually out there aren't even close to the reality of the situation. We started looking into what happened to Jeffrey Taylor after seeing a local report out of San Antonio, Texas.
Family prayer? Okay, well, let us pray. Who's first?
Me.
My gun was kept in my Bible case. And at that particular day, it was pushed up under my bed.
I don't know if he may have just slipped up, when you're in your parents' room and you see something you're not supposed to see.
I went straight to the room. I saw my baby laying there like he normally is. But when I looked to the left, I saw my gun. And I saw blood, dry blood on my baby's face. And I just screamed. I yelled and I said, "Holy Jeffrey, Mama." My baby was hard as a rock. He was hard as a rock. I put him back. And all I can do is run. I was screaming. I just kept saying, "Jeffrey, why? I told you to hold on. I was gonna take care of it." But God has something else in store for my baby. That is something that's gonna always stay with me, probably to the day I die. Hear my baby cry out to me, because that was a different cry.
At present, it appears to be an accidental event with no clear evidence of foul play or suicide.
We know a lot about what works for white youth in terms of preventing suicide, and we just don't have that same evidence base or literature around Black youth suicide.
We've gone from feeling like suicide really wasn't an issue for Black and brown communities to now realizing that Black and brown kids, and particularly young Black males, are dying at rates double that of our white peers. I grew up hearing that if you're experiencing anxiety or depression, you just need to pray harder. I didn't have the right to feel anxiety. I didn't have the right to feel emotional pain. We saw the deaths of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. And for Black and brown kids that see this over time, that starts to weigh on anyone.
He's gonna have the rest of his life to deal with the Trayvon Martins and Tamir Rices and all of that. But I want this little boy to be a little boy. Come on, Seven. With my son's death, for me, I have responsibility. And that's the scary part. No one's talking about bullying and suicide because it's so stigmatized. And then all of the people who speak to me, the survivors' parents, for some reason or another, they find me. Y'all got a slew of 800-888 numbers you can call. But you happen to find this 502 number and call me. I'm getting ready to talk to this little girl about being bullied and how to feel. And the first thing this little girl asked me, "Miss Tammy, do you think Seven's in a better place? Do you think he's happy there? Do you think that I would be more happy where Seven is? I have to do this for them, not for my own child, but for that child and so many others that have called me." I say to them, No, this is exactly why 7 is there. So that you can pull on his strength and find the happiness from his strength to live through you.
And I just found all this over-the-counter medication. I just took pill after pill.
What'd you feel when you woke up?
Sadness and anger.
Kids are suffering in silence.
By default, even here, like, you as a Black child, you are seen as unruly. If you do one thing, it is magnified.
I just try to listen to them because you don't know what somebody needs exactly until you hear what they have to say.
They go to what they know, they go to what they see, and what they see says maybe not living is a solution.
I didn't feel as if I had a right to be sad. I didn't feel as if I had a right to not want to be here and to have all these negative emotions because I was living this amazing life, supposedly, and I just didn't feel as if it was validated. And when you don't feel validated, you don't speak up. I go back and look at pictures of myself, and you can see it in my eyes. I was sitting there knowing that this was my time, and it was my time to go, and I was very confident in that decision. I just took pill after pill, and I went back into the bedroom. I just laid down, closed my eyes, and then the following morning I woke up.
What'd you feel when you woke up?
Sadness and anger. I had the burden of knowing I tried to take my own life.
Paige Gaines is one of the tens of thousands of survivors of suicide, and now she's trying to help other kids survive as well. Efforts to help kids combat suicide have worked among white children, but for Black kids, hasn't done a thing. The numbers are still going up fast.
If you see that children, regardless of race, regardless of culture, if you see that children are dying, and they're dying from something that is very often preventable, that should be something that alarms all of us.
Kids are suffering in silence, and what do? They go to what they know, they go to what they see, and what they see says maybe not living is a solution. There's this lack of preparation often from all of the adults in their lives to help them understand the kinds of challenges that they're going to have to navigate and the extent to which they're going to have to navigate these challenges.
As a Black person in the public school system, mental health will be taught in a way that's like everybody's the same, and I can appreciate, like, I see where you're coming from, but everybody's not the same. As a Black child, I'm dealing with generational trauma. I'm dealing with racism. I'm dealing with colorism from the Black community sometimes. It's a lot on top of each other.
I don't belong in this crowd. I don't belong in that crowd. If I act a certain way around white people, I'll be labeled as ghetto. If I act a certain way around, you know, Black people, or like I'll be labeled as trying to act white.
I learned this like at a very young age because like my elementary school never talked about race at all. And I feel like race isn't communicated well in schools.
In the Black community, children are expected to grow up faster. They're treated as grown-ups. They're being like suspended at higher rates, and they're often pushed to the side or treated like they can deal with more.
Now I'm being expected to act much older, and so I feel like that's like a lot of responsibilities and pressure.
There's this data that says that often people look at Black children as much older than they are. So the child might actually be 6, but people are looking at him or her like they're 10 years old and treating them accordingly.
If a Black kid is acting out in class, they move towards punishing that behavior instead of getting the kid help, saying maybe something's going on at home, maybe this is a mental health concern.
They need policies that say we will tolerate this, we will not tolerate that. Here's what happens. First offense is this, second offense is this, third offense, you gotta get out of here.
People having spaces to talk about it where they feel comfortable.
In my experience, having a Black person talk to me about mental health and to talk about racism openly and to call out racism in the classroom has been so beneficial because it helps me see my self-worth.
When you look at pictures like people talking to therapists, it's always like a white girl with blonde hair talking to her white therapist, and it's like, well, if it's only white people who need therapy, then clearly I'm fine.
What I say to parents is don't beat yourself up, right? You're doing the best you can. Do not ask kids, how was your day? Because you're gonna get fine. Instead, you change the question, reframe the question. Tell me something good that happened to you today. Tell me something bad that happened to you today. And then what did you think about that thing that happened to you?
Keep pounding the table. Keep demanding that we put the resources in place and that we fund the resources that allow us to keep our children from dying by suicide. There is no indication that we have a handle on this. There's no indication that this is getting better. And if we don't do something different, we're going to continue down this road.
Our kids are dying. They are choosing not to live anymore, and there's no indication that it's getting any better, but it can. You just heard several ways that it can from the kids themselves. And this isn't just a story about Black kids, because the facts are, if your child is sitting in the same classroom as that kid, they are falling victim to a system that is not equipped to handle our kids' cries. It might be a different cry, but the tears are still the same. Just listen.
You don't know what somebody needs exactly until you hear what they have to say.
Don't then say, well, no, because you have a great life, and no, because you're not failing your classes, and no, because you have all these great friends. Letting people talk. Let me talk. Let me explain it.
You have no reason to feel this way, therefore your feelings aren't valid, but they are valid because you're feeling like that's how you feel, and how you feel is important.
Let me tell you what I don't tell you when I come home from school. Let me tell you about the kids who keep bothering me. Let me tell you about the fact that I don't understand my math class, but somehow I'm still passing. If I finish, then maybe you'll understand.
Black children need to stop being isolated and treated like as other. They need to be given safe spaces.
We train police officers, we train doctors and things like that in suicide prevention, but if you train the teenager that's sitting next to the teenager that's suicidal, they can recognize those signs. A lot of people are struggling and we keep it to ourselves, but I've recognized that by me being transparent, it saved my life, and it's also saving other people's lives.
Such an incredibly difficult series to watch, I know, but it was so important because we have to start this conversation. It's not one that has really been had before on this scale. And to help me with that conversation, I want to bring in TAMI Charles. You heard from her at the beginning of the series, Seven's mom, as you like to be called.
Absolutely.
TAMI.
Just renamed Seven's mom.
Seven's mom. Well, first, thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
But I really want to say thank you for sharing this story because I know it came at a great personal cost, something that people don't know about. You talked about the stigma of talking about suicide, but it goes deeper than that.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the 40 police reports that were filed after your son died by suicide.
Well, first of all, Madison, I am a person that has been around the world, and I am a people person. Okay. And I'm also a veteran, so for the same people that wanted the 40 police reports, I fought for their freedom as the ones who have a bleeding heart, and it's understandable for me.
But they said in those police reports, TAMI,
that I killed him.
Yes.
And again, my father always calls me the expert testimony that always gives reasonable doubt. And then he also says I'm a guilty man's lawyer. And because of that,
what does that mean?
It means that I get it.
Okay.
Who wants to put 10-year-old and suicide in the same sentence? Mm-hmm. And the fact that I drew that ire, I knew that I could take it. Mm-hmm. I knew that anything that they could say and might say to put me under scrutiny, my faith has been tried by fire and I've prevailed. But it wasn't a personal thing. I never took it as a personal attack. What I did, though, was take it personally that they would have this attack on me, and I've had a clean and clear defense. But for the other parents who have the same clear defense to be downtrodden and beaten by these accusations. I knew that I'd had to withstand this for them. And furthermore, that speculation, that finger pointing, and that thing, that's sadly almost human nature. You're desensitized to the fact that a parent can kill a child, but still in awe that a child can complete suicide.
It makes more sense that the child be killed than the child would take their own life.
Absolutely.
But in this story, Tammy, we saw you do everything that any parent could be told to do, would think to do, and
above and beyond.
Above and beyond, and still this result. So what do you say to those parents who watch this series and they're terrified now? Because they say, well, then what do I do?
Absolutely. First of all, that's the reason that I want to do 7 Strong, is because there are more people who don't know what to do than the people like myself who did everything. I want to make sure that they have no residual guilt. I want them to understand that there is a way to do anything. To that end, I also wanted to be the one that they can look to and say, if this parent has done everything, number one, how did I pattern that? How do I pattern that?
Yeah.
And still with this result.
There were 2 questions people had for you in particular.
Absolutely.
After watching this series. The first one was when you said you didn't talk to your son about issues about race. Because he was young.
Yeah.
Well, first let's start there. Why?
Well, I talked to him about race. We did everything. We do Kwanzaa, we do everything African American.
Okay.
However, the racial inequalities and the injustices, he was only 10. So I allowed that time for him to know all the great things and all the inclusive things before I let him know all the margins, or how to be marginalized and what the stigmas that follow us as a people, and him as a black man.
Going back, would you have had those conversations sooner?
Absolutely not.
Wow.
No, I wanted my son to be a child. My son was a 10-year-old little boy, and a lot of parents can relate to, they know some 10-year-old grown men. My baby was still playing with his toys. He just asked me for the first time a sex question that I was like, oh my gosh, what is this going on? Right. And we had strict parental controls on what he saw, what he heard, no potty words. I'm a United States sailor, and I absolutely love swear words. And my son had never heard any swear words in his home. It is the restraint as older parents that we gave him, and we knew that we could create a child's world, and we did.
Knowing you now, that's impressive. That is restraint. My last question from people who saw this series: why didn't you pull 7 out of school?
And his principal asked me that the day after I came, that they had their staff meeting, and she said, well, 7's still in school today. And so my answer to her and to them was, he didn't do anything. I sent him to a place where he was supposed to be protected by the adults. How would I have ever known that it was the adults who were causing him the most harm? And from that, I still believe I still would not have taken him out, because at the end of the day, I believe that we as adults still have a responsibility to these children. And seeing his face every day made sure that they could not shirk that.
And then my last question to you, I know you're working in March, you're going to launch this 7 Strong initiative.
Absolutely.
You speak publicly, you're going around the country talking.
Yes.
What do you say? What are you saying to schools in particular about how to handle these bullying complaints, and what do parents need to do?
Well, the deal is that I don't necessarily have to teach them anything. We pay taxes where they're all in policy. I would encourage any parent, like I did, to be involved in the PTA. I was involved in the policy council. I helped read and write and restructure their standard of operating procedures. I was that involved. I would also encourage them to read what's written. Just read it. Yeah, we can go on, but just read what's written and know that when they send home every year a paper for the students to sign, know that they have a responsibility and something that they have to sign as well. So I want to go around to just remind them that there is policies in place. And then to remind them to know those policies so they won't be, a lot of parents come to me like, well, the principal said this and I believed her. Everyone has a boss. Everyone has somebody that they need to be accountable to. From that, I ask everybody to exercise that. I was doing that very thing. I did every single thing. And even with 7 in heaven, I still have that to do. Yeah. And for the first time anyone's hearing it or the first time it's ever been said, your children will keep you busy whether they are alive or dead.
Tammy, I can't thank you enough for first trusting me with the story, me and my team. I know your voice has been resonating across the nation, 7's story, and I just want to say that I know we've saved a lot of lives. We're going to with the story and 7's story.
We will do more.
All right. We first met Lakeisha and Jermaine Chaney in the second part of our series. They are parents to 7-year-old Jeffrey Taylor, and we really got into his story to explain why suicides are so undercounted in this community. So joining us now live is Lakeisha Chaney, Jeffrey's mom. Lakeisha, I first want to say thank you once again for being here with us and talking about what happened to Jeffrey.
Thank you for this opportunity.
The first thing I want to ask, you and I have a relationship. We talk nearly every week, whether we're having a conversation or praying about this series or something else. And I know how incredibly emotional it was to tell this story, to talk about what happened to your son. So what was it like when you first saw this piece come out and you saw Jeffrey's story that the rest of the nation has now seen?
I felt a form of release, just coming out, someone hearing my voice, to be the voice for my baby that's no longer here to speak for himself. Forgive me if I cry, I'm sorry. It's just been, I'm just happy that I'm able to speak. My voice is getting out so that I can touch other parents that don't even know if their child is even going through a situation like my baby has.
And you talked about your voice finally being heard. A lot of people don't know that it was a year after Jeffrey died that you first came out to share that you believe he had died by suicide because of the bullying and what it was like at school. But he wasn't the only one that faced bullying after that story came out. Lakeisha, you were run off the internet because of the comments and the judgment. So what do you have to say to those parents who particularly were pointing the finger at you and your husband in this really difficult time?
Well, I came to the conclusion that everybody's going to say what they have to say, and I can't stop them from saying it. But what I can do with myself, I can stop myself from feeding into negative comments. If only they knew the whole story, the things that's been showed on the media, it's only giving them portions of what my son has had to endure. The things that my son had to go through at that school, had I not known all the stuff that was transpiring from this teacher, the school district, I wouldn't probably be sitting here doing an interview about my son. All I can say to these parents is, hear the facts, listen to them. There's another side of this story that needs to be told. And if it was your child, like my husband says, what would you do?
And Lakeisha, I guess as a journalist, as someone who knows you well, my question is, do you think it was worth it coming out, telling the story? We know that the goal here was to save other children's lives, but you told me just this past week you decided to pull your other daughter out of school because of what's been the feedback, especially in your community, and it being negative. So was it worth it?
Yes, it was worth it. It was worth getting my voice out to be heard to the world that everybody thinks is so beautiful, and then we got so much cruelty going on in our society.
And I know it's difficult, and I guess the last thing I want to ask you is what we can say to other parents. I know that you're working to start an organization particularly to speak to parents about what they can look for, but looking back at your baby, looking back at how he came home that one day and you heard for the first time what was going on, what can you tell other parents? What are some things that maybe as you look back now you can say, oh, he was sad this day, or he said this? Is there anything you can think of that other parents can look for now?
Well, by us being a spiritual family, my son didn't tell us a lot of things because the way he's brought up in the home is you pray for your enemies, and you just continue to keep doing what you have to do and don't let people negative things get you down. But unfortunately, my baby was full of a lot of negative in his little brain of his, and he was only 7 years old. And what I have to tell parents is, from my learning my experience with going through what I'm going through with my 7-year-old, I'm learning a lot more to talk in open communication with my 5-year-old daughter. My guards is up, of course, but for the parents to understand that their children has a lot more to say than just "I'm fine." We just got to open up the little brains of theirs.
Yeah. And communication is the one thing that experts and all the psychologists agree. Talking to your babies, having that conversation. Lakeisha, I want to say thank you so much for being here, sharing your story, and talking with us tonight.
Thank you.
Now I want to bring in some of those other voices from this series, the people who really helped glue this piece together and could help us tonight talk to parents about what needs to happen next. So joining us now, we have Dr. Alfie Breland Noble. She has spent more than 2 decades working as a psychologist with Black youth. She founded the Acoma Project outside of Washington to serve this population in particular. She's one of the very few people in this space. We're going to get into that as well. We also have Victor Armstrong. He is currently serving as the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services Chief Health Equity Officer. He is a nationally recognized speaker on health equity and access to health care for young Black men in particular who are dealing with mental illness. Finally joining us is Paige Gaines. You heard from her in this series as well. She is a 2-time suicide survivor and has founded 911 Sane Jane. This is a mental health organization that aims to decrease the stigma surrounding suicide and mental health in the Black community. I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. So this series has been out for about a week now, and a couple different things have come up for so many people, but the one question we get the most is why prevention efforts have worked for white children, but they're really not reaching our kids, Black kids. Victor, you and I talked about this a lot in our discussion. So what is happening here in our nation to where suicide efforts and prevention efforts aren't reaching this particular population?
Yeah, great question. I think first of all, I would probably start by saying I don't think suicide efforts are necessarily working for any population. We really have a lot of work to do. I think when we talk though specifically about Black and Brown communities, part of the challenge has been that we really have not really taken into account the nuances of race and culture and ethnicity as we have designed our outreach efforts. We have not always included the voices of the Black community in talking about the difference in the Black experience in America, what that looks like, what that means, what the pressures are, how we talk about suicide or don't talk about suicide in our communities. And so I think until we really take a deep dive into those nuances and really build that into the fabric of how we design our suicide prevention and awareness strategies, we're always going to find ourselves speaking to a subset of the population and leaving out others in the population.
And Dr. Alfie, you do this work. You work with Black youth in your organization. So a lot of people might ask, what's the difference between Black kids and white kids or Latino kids when it comes to mental health services?
Yeah, so I always love this question. This takes me back about 20-something years when I first started my career, because that was exactly the question. And I think Vic just spoke to it very clearly. Black children are exposed to stressors that some other children are not exposed to. They're exposed to stressors related to racism and discrimination. They're exposed to stressors related to disparities. They're exposed to all kinds of challenges in their childhood. Think about the data that tells us that people look at 10-year-old boys as full-grown adults. And these things are pretty unique to Black children. So that's why it's important. If we don't factor in these things, echoing my brother Vic, then we're not addressing the full child. And this is how we end up with some of these challenges and disparities that we see right now.
And Paige, you were one of those children. Your first suicide attempt came at just 12 years old, and people were so shocked to hear that. But we also heard from those girls in this piece, right? And what they said was completely different from what I anticipated children were dealing with today. We're talking about anxiety, depression. So now that you're a little bit older, going back to that space page, what can you say in terms of what parents can be looking for and how children can communicate to parents what they need?
Say, as far as what parents should be looking for, the number one thing for me when I was at that age was a space of isolation, really wanting to be by myself, really not communicating, just preferring to be alone. That is a huge sign of being suicidal. That is a huge sign of depression. And then that anxiety starts to kick in. So I would say that would be the biggest thing. And then as a child and being an adult now and looking back on it, it was a pleasure seeing those young ladies talk about their mental health in such an articulate way, because I did not have that very same language. So using those resources, using that language to communicate with your parents. I understand that that could be a challenge as well. So having that advocate, if you're in therapy, have that therapist be your advocate in navigating that conversation, possibly even a school counselor. So definitely learning that language and then having an advocate help you navigate that.
And Dr. Alfie, I want to go back to some of your work, because as you work in this space, you're talking with parents, particularly Black parents. And you know that there are some often barriers, right? There's religion. A lot of Black families say, let's go to church, let's pray about it, or they don't think that the issues are that serious. So what do you tell parents about how they should react to their kids if they're struggling?
100%. So just echoing what Paige said, I think the most important thing is that we listen, we use our eyes, and we use the power of observation. So I'm talking to parents all the time. The kids that have the best outcomes are the kids where there are strong communication patterns and kids feel open and welcomed enough to be able to speak to their parents about whatever's going on. I tell parents, don't fix. You listen with intent, you listen with love, you listen to hear what is needed, but we don't listen to fix it, because we can't fix it. And we don't want to rob our children of the ability to develop the skills, the cognitive flexibility, and the types of behaviors they're going to need lifelong to be able to address their own problems. So I tell parents, listen, observe, be open in an appropriate way, share with your kids what your own struggles have been in an appropriate way, I say, and just be ready to do whatever you need to do to get that child help when they're ready to get that mental health professional help.
One of the challenges I think too is that for Black kids, they're already navigating a society where so much of the response to them is going to be response to their behavior. People acting on what they see rather than what is behind the behavior. And so oftentimes kids that may be responding to trauma, maybe responding to depression or anxiety, their behavior is going to be met with reprimand and punishment because it's viewed as defiance and acting out. And so it's that much more important that kids have that safe space at home where they can talk about those feelings and know that when they do talk about those feelings, they're going to be met with understanding from a loving parent.
And since this piece has come out, we're talking about children, babies in this piece, but we've seen 4 prominent suicide deaths in the Black community. We saw Miss USA, we saw the mayor in Hagerstown, Maryland. We also saw just recently the gentleman from The Walking Dead, Regina King's son, dying by suicide. So now this topic of suicide in the Black community is really at the forefront. And Victor, you and I talked about this for the piece, how this used to be something that Black people said, oh, this doesn't impact us. And now that it is, what are you seeing in the space? Because there are not enough resources for Black mental health today.
No, but I'm seeing a couple of things. One is I do think that more and more we're seeing people kind of come out and want to talk about the impact of suicide in our community. I think the other thing that you're saying is that for a lot of us that have been having this conversation, we're screaming louder and saying, hey, there are some of us out here who are talking about suicide and suicide prevention and awareness in the Black community. And we invite other people to come to this conversation. So one thing that I'm always a little bit disheartened about is that it takes the death of a celebrity or a well-known person to start the conversation on a more broad, in a more broad sense. But having said that, I think we need to take every opportunity to educate our people and really have more open and honest dialogue about suicide and its impact on the Black community.
I also think we can't dismiss the real lived experience of historically when Black people have talked about having these struggles, people being dismissive. Now, I'm not talking about Black folks. I'm talking about the experience of discrimination. So I can think about 30, 40 years ago, some of my mentors in the research field, in this research space, talking about the need to pursue this work and being met with, well, Black kids' mental health is no different than anybody else's. So why do we need to focus on your mental health? We already know how to deal with suicide. We already know how to treat depression. And what I would argue is the fact that in 2022, we still have no single large-scale study, which we call randomized controlled trials, where we can say definitively, we know how to treat some of these illnesses in our young people That's the problem. So we can't dismiss what's come from the outside in terms of how people respond to Black people's need for mental health services and support as well.
And Paige, you now work in this space. You used to be that child and now you're trying to help other kids. What are some things that you're hearing and what are the top things that you say, particularly to youth, so that it can help each other?
I would say, gosh, just from working in the field and working one-on-one with youth, actually within a Zero Suicide grant, was really just having that conversation and really being able, I really have to hone in on this, having that language and having that communication and having that support system, being able to talk to a friend, being able to talk to an adult. But I also believe in education. So being able to provide the education of suicide prevention trainings, and again, that language to teachers, to doctors, and to the youth so they can have that conversation with each other. If you have a teenager that's sitting in class with a friend and the friend is expressing suicidal ideations, that teen is able to say, hey, teacher or counselor, this is what I've heard, this is what I think we should do, because they're skilled in that. So it needs to go beyond that teacher, it needs to go beyond that counselor. This information needs to be spread to everybody. If I was aware, I would have had that conversation with the friend, and I'm sure they would have done it with me as well.
And before we wrap up here, I do want to talk about one thing that came up from a lot of parents we showed this series to. They said they're afraid to talk to a young person, a 5, 6, 7-year-old, about suicide because they don't want to give them the idea. They're wondering, where are kids learning this from? So Dr. Alfie, what do you say? It's a misconception, right, that talking about suicide will give someone the idea.
100%. And I think Vic would agree with me on that, knowing how, his prominence in the field and how long he's been doing this work. And I think one of the ways that we can help parents broach the subject, I tell them a couple things. One is you have to be prepared yourself. So how equipped are you to enter into a conversation? How equipped are you to hear a child say, if they're 7 or 8, I don't want to be here anymore, I don't want to live anymore? That's one thing. The second thing is, I think one thing that I learned that I have found super useful, even with little kids, is to say, is there any part of you that doesn't want to live anymore? Is there any tiny part of you that doesn't want to hurt yourself? Because that gives a person an entry point, and they don't have to feel so overwhelmed by all of those feelings, and they don't have to feel judged, right? So if there's a teeny part of you that doesn't want to be here anymore, I want to help that teeny part. So those are some of the things that I share with parents. By asking the question, you have to ask the question. You can't avoid that question.
All right, and my last question, let's talk about schools, because the series really came down to the fact that schools are not equipped to handle bullying complaints, whether your kid's white, black, purple, pink, tall, or short, right? If a kid's being bullied, the schools are so unaware of what to do. And it's scary, right? After you listen to Tami's story, when you think she did everything by the book. So what, Victor, can parents do in schools as they navigate this space of trying to figure out how to handle bullying complaints?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because you look at Tami's story and you have a parent who did everything that they knew to do and still met with basically a door that was closed in her face. But I would encourage parents, first of all, I think that conversation really needs to start with your child. Make sure that you are asking the questions about what's going on, how they're feeling, how they're processing things, and then have those conversations with the school. And oftentimes the schools need to be educated. If you're not getting what you need from the school system, I would say elevate it to the Board of Education, elevate it to the superintendent. Keep talking until you find someone who will listen. And oftentimes there are parent support groups that will also intervene with you in this conversation. I would take it to NAMI. I would take it to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I would find every ally that I can get to say, I see something here. I have a problem. I don't feel like people are hearing what I'm saying, and I need your support.
Can I just add one tiny thing? I also think, in addition to everything Victor has said, I think it's really important for parents to recognize that if they have the means, we have a duty and a responsibility to keep our children out of an unsafe environment. So if the school is, I'm a product of public school teacher, so it's my whole life, going back to my great-grandmother. So if a child is not safe in that environment, I don't think there's any other situation where we would willingly send a child into an unsafe environment. And if the school is unsafe, just like those young ladies were saying on the video, just like we saw in the film, what was happening to this young boy, keep him off the bus, keep him out of the school. You have a duty, you have a right, and you have earned the right to have your child in a safe environment. And if they can't keep them safe, then I say as a parent, do whatever you can to keep them out of that environment.
Absolutely.
All right, Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble, Victor Armstrong, Paige Gaines, I cannot thank you enough for being a part of this series, being a part of this discussion, and this was just the beginning of the conversation. To watch the series again and find resources near you in your community, go to 11alive.com/a different cry. I'm Madison Carter. Thanks for watching. Good night.